Hello and welcome to Library Class, it's good to see you. This week we're looking at a really intriguing idea, and the idea is this, that there is a story structure that is used in many of the stories that we know and love today that was also being used in stories that are many thousands of years old. The name of that story structure is The Hero's Journey! And if you've never heard about it, don't worry. I hope that by the end of this video you'll be able to see a connection between stories such as Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Lion King, Iron Man, Spider-Man, and ancient Greek myths such as the story of Perseus and his struggle against the Medusa. And we're going to start with this story, the story of Perseus and Medusa, just to give ourselves something to get our teeth into when we look at the structure of the hero's journey. Hero's journey! We're going to do that every time. I don't know, maybe. Okay. All right. So we'll listen to the myth and then we'll have a look at the structure. Enjoy Perseus and Medusa. Perseus and Medusa! Yeah, I think we're going to have to stop that. All right, here we go. Many years ago, on the island of Seriphos in ancient Greece, there lived an old honest fisherman named Dictys. One day he was working his nets by the shore when he caught a glimpse of a large wooden chest, bobbing just beyond the breaking waves. "How curious," he said, and plunged into the water to drag the box to the beach. Once the lid was opened, he was astonished to see a beautiful young woman and her baby had been trapped inside, and, even more astonishingly, they were still alive. The pair had been cast into the sea by the woman's father, who was fearful that the baby, who he knew to be the son of the king of the gods, Zeus, would grow up and harm him. The fisherman kindly cared for the woman, who was called Danae, and her baby, who was called Perseus. Perseus grew to be a man, strong and brave, helping Dictys with his fishing, while his mother's beauty began to catch the eye of the king of Seriphos, Polydectes, who was Dictys's brother. But where Dictys was kind and generous, Polydectes was mean and spiteful, and Perseus began to be afraid that he was set on marrying his mother. Perseus was right. Polydectes was indeed after his mum, and he knew he had to get rid of Perseus so he could seize her for his wife. Cunningly he announced a birthday party for himself, invited Perseus, and pretended to be shocked when the hero, after all a lowly fisherman, turned up without a gift. Perseus let his pride get the better of him, just as Polydectes had known that it would. "Name any gift," said Perseus rashly, "and I'll bring it to you." Quick as a flash, Polydectes seized his chance. "Bring me the head of Medusa," he announced, "and wrap it up nicely." This was very bad news. Medusa was a fearsome creature, one of the snake-haired Gorgons, whose gaze was so fearsome, so utterly, mind-bogglingly frightful, that just one glimpse from her eyes would instantly turn whoever was looking at her into solid stone. Perseus didn't know it, but he was as good as dead, or more accurately, as good as being turned into a garden ornament. Perseus had no wish to leave his mother, but he had no choice but to set off. Happily for him, his luck began to change. Athena, goddess of wisdom, had come down to earth to help him, and she told Perseus to find a group of tree nymphs who would be able to give him something vital to his quest. Getting to the nymphs was not going to be easy, however, as the only people who knew where they were three spooky sisters, the Graeae, who, get this, only had one eye between them that they would pass from gruesome sister to gruesome sister every time one of them wanted to actually see something. "Who's this coming, eh? Who's this?" croaked the eldest sister as Perseus approached. "Pass me the eye, sisters! Pass me the eye!" But Perseus was swift, and he snatched the eye mid-pass, and oh, how the Graeae shrieked and howled. But Perseus stood firm. "You shall have your eye, sisters, once you tell me where I can find the tree nymphs, who can help me on my quest." "Oh, all right," said the middle hag. "You've got yourself a deal." The sisters directed him to an orchard, and Perseus, true to his word, returned the eye. Perseus arrived at the orchard of the nymphs, and he found them to be welcoming. They presented him with a magic bag to keep the head of Medusa in, for even if Perseus was successful in cutting it off, it would still keep its dreadful ability to turn all who looked upon it into statues. But that wasn't all. The gods gave him further gifts. Athena presented him with a highly polished shield, Zeus an indestructible sword, Hades, the god of the underworld, a helmet of invisibility, and Hermes, the messenger of the gods, gave Perseus a pair of winged shoes that would enable him to fly. Now there was no avoiding it. It was time to enter Medusa's cave. Flying there swiftly on his winged shoes, Perseus nevertheless went in slowly. He was a brave man, but that didn't mean he wasn't fearful. And it wasn't exactly cheering to find the cave's entrance and passages filled with statues of previous heroes who had tried to kill the Medusa, only to be turned forever to stone. But again, luck was on his side. The Gorgon Medusa was sleeping. But how to approach her? Much less try to cut off her head without looking directly at her. She was sure to open her eyes as he struck at her head, and that would be the end of him. He sighed and looked down at his shield. That was it! The shield! It was so brightly polished that it worked like a mirror. He could approach her looking only in the shield and never directly at her. This he did, and lopped off her hissing head with one heavy swing of Zeus's sword. Eyes still fixed on the shield, he placed the head quickly in the magic bag. He leapt into the air, borne aloft by Hermes' winged shoes, and headed for home. He was halfway there when he spotted, off the coast of Ethiopia, a beautiful maiden chained to the rocks, with a hulking, snarling great sea monster rising from the waves, clearly set on devouring her, chains and all. The maiden's name was Andromeda, and her mother had committed the foolish error of boasting that her daughter's beauty rivaled that of sea nymphs. Poseidon, the god of the sea, had become so incensed by her boasting that he commanded a sea monster to flood and attack the kingdom. The king and people of Ethiopia, desperate for the attacks to stop, were convinced by an oracle that the only way to stop the attacks was to sacrifice Andromeda to the sea beast. It was that sacrifice that Perseus had arrived precisely in the middle of. Not even stopping to unpack the Gorgon's head, Perseus once again raised his sword and swooped down in a blur, slaying the monster outright. Andromeda returned home with him as his bride. It goes without saying that Polydectes was not pleased to see Perseus back. He fully expected him to have been killed. "I have done what you asked," said Perseus. "I have brought you the head of the Gorgon Medusa."
"What nonsense! That's impossible,"
sneered Polydectes.
"Show me."
Well, Perseus had been brought up by his mother to do what he was told. He opened the bag, took out the head, and Polydectes was turned to stone. Now that is an action-packed story, and it's a popular one too. It's one of the most retold stories ever. But it's not just a great story. The tale of Perseus and Medusa is also a really great example of the hero's journey story, that structure that we mentioned right at the beginning of this video. The hero's journey is an idea that was first made famous by a literature professor called Joseph Campbell. He spent his whole life studying myths and stories from different times and different cultures, and began to feel that many of those stories shared ideas and themes. He also said that many myths were essentially different versions of the same basic story. That story was, of course, the hero's journey. So let's take a look at this hero's journey. What happens in it? And is it really similar to many other stories? Well, to find out, let's do a comparison between the hero's journey and the myth of Perseus and Medusa that we just listened to, and see if they match up. So, I'm going to draw a diagram of the hero's journey, showing some of the main events and characters that Campbell says we can find there. As I do so, why don't you follow along and see if we can spot examples of those same events and characters in the story of Perseus and Medusa. All right. Okay, the hero's journey. So let's draw our hero. Now for us, that's Perseus. Let's draw the whole journey the hero goes on, which is a circle, because they set off on the journey, have their adventure, and then come all the way back home again, just like Perseus did. Now Campbell says some of the hero's journey takes place in the normal world that the hero already knows, and some of the journey takes place in the magical world that the hero doesn't know. So let's just draw a line across his journey here. So if you follow the circle round, you can see that the hero starts off in this ordinary world, goes into the magical world, and then comes back into the ordinary world when they come home. Well, I think we can say that's true for Perseus. He starts on his island as a fisherman, then goes into a land where there's a Medusa and sea monsters, and then comes back again to his island. Right, let's look at more of the hero's journey and see if that also matches up. Well, the story is supposed to start with the hero leading an ordinary life, and that does match the myth of Perseus. He starts the story as a fisherman. Then the hero is supposed to receive a call to adventure, something that sets them off on their travels. Well, that's also true of the Perseus story, because he's told to go and get the Medusa's head. Next, the hero is supposed to meet a magical helper who will give them advice or a special object to help them. Again, that's true of Perseus, because he meets Athene and she gives him advice, and later, special equipment to help him in his quest. Now the adventure starts properly. The action moves to the magical world, and the hero has to face perils and problems. And that is definitely true of poor old Perseus, who has to face the grey ear in order to find out how to get to the nymphs. Okay, so far so good. Perseus' story really has followed the pattern of the hero's journey. Let's see what happens next. Well, what's supposed to happen next is the big test, or ordeal, where the hero really has to suffer. He or she goes up against a big challenge or a big monster. It's like the final boss fight in a video game. And very often that conflict will take place in a cave or a pit. And bingo! We definitely have a match here. Perseus has to summon up all his courage to go and face and defeat Medusa in a cave. Now the hero is supposed to come out of the big test with some kind of reward or special powers. And yeah, that's absolutely what Perseus comes out with, because he comes out with the Medusa's head, which has the power to turn people to stone. Now it's time for the hero to return home. Adventures can be had on the way, and Perseus definitely does this, rescuing Andromeda from the sea monster. When the hero does arrive back to where they started from, however, they are changed in some way. They know something about themselves they didn't know before. Perseus knows that he's a hero and is capable of all sorts of brave deeds. Also, the heroes are supposed to bring with them a gift, something that makes life better for the people around them. And Perseus does this, if you look at it a certain way. He brings back the Medusa's head and uses it to turn the evil king into stone. Well, it's pretty clear that Perseus and Medusa is indeed a good match with the hero's journey. And you'll find as you get to know more and more ancient myths, you'll see the pattern of the hero's journey again and again. Well, what about modern stories? Can we see the hero's journey there? Well, the answer with regard to one particular modern story is a definite yes. And that story is Star Wars. The writer and director of Star Wars, George Lucas, was so interested and impressed with Joseph Campbell's work that he decided to base the entire script on the hero's journey, figuring that at the very least it would make for an entertaining story. Now, if you want to trace the hero's journey in Star Wars, because you've seen the film and you're a fan, I recommend that you do. It's really fun to have a go at it. I'll give you a clue, Luke Skywalker is the hero. But we're going to look at another modern story that is almost as popular as Star Wars, and that is Harry Potter, specifically Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This is where I stop for a second, because if you haven't read or seen the first Harry Potter story, well, firstly, no worries, there's a lot of things I haven't read or seen. Secondly, fantastic, you were in for such a treat when you do read the first book. And thirdly, sadly, this is where this video stops for you. Honestly, it is far more important that you enjoy that first Harry Potter story with no spoilers than it is you sit there listening to me. So take care. I'll see you guys next week. The rest of you, stay put a moment. Right, is anyone still there? I hope so, because this is going to be fun. We're going to go back through the hero's journey, but this time, instead of trying to make connections to Perseus, we're going to make connections to Harry Potter. And you guys who are big fans of Harry Potter, you might be able to make connections ahead of me, so let's see how you do. Okay, so here's our hero, Harry Potter this time instead of Perseus. Let's give him his journey, which again is a circle because he starts in Privet Drive, has his adventures and then comes back to Privet Drive. And Privet Drive is obviously the ordinary world, whereas Hogwarts and everything around it is the magical world, which is the unknown world for Harry at the beginning. Okay, let's move through the different stages and see what matches. So stage 1, the ordinary life, and Harry Potter living in a cupboard under the stairs definitely counts as the ordinary life. Stage 2 is of course the call or invitation to adventure, and Harry's call to adventure comes in the form of a letter from Hogwarts inviting him to go. What about magic helpers? Well, the man who finally delivers a letter to Harry is of course Hagrid, and he really is a magic helper. He's the first to give Harry information about the magical world of wizardry, and he gives Harry access to several magical objects, including a magic wand, when they go to Diagon Alley. Now it's time for the adventure to begin properly, and for Harry to cross over into the magical world. Of course, he does do that for the first time when he goes into Diagon Alley, but it's also true of the scene where he catches the Hogwarts Express. To get to the Hogwarts Express and to get to Diagon Alley, did you notice? He has to go through a wall to cross from the non-magical world to the magical world, just like going through the line on a diagram. So now the hero has to face problems and perils, and Harry definitely has to do that. He's got Snape to contend with and a mountain troll. He does have allies, friends in the form of Ron and Hermione, and of course, possibly another magical helper figure, Dumbledore. Building friendships can be a big part of the problems and perils section of the hero's journey. Whoa, now it's time for the hero's big test. And in the case of Harry and his friends, this is when they have to face all the threats and dangerous puzzles on the way to the room where the Sorcerer's Stone is kept. Harry himself goes on alone into the innermost room and of course has to face down Quirrell before finally getting hold of the Sorcerer's Stone. And that is the special power he brings out from the big test, as well as the discovery that his mother's love has protected him. Lastly, we have the return. Harry goes back to Privet Drive, but he is not the same as when he left. He now knows that he is a wizard. That's his special gift to the people around him, because now he has the power to stand up to Voldemort. Well, as you can see, the hero's journey is a really influential pattern, and in the hands of a talented writer can make for a really enjoyable story. See if you can find it in the stories and movies that you enjoy. It may well be there. Now, I do want to make 2 final points. First, if you enjoyed the illustrations we just saw in that Harry Potter section, they are by a painter and illustrator called Jim Kay. He has illustrated, I think, the first 3 Harry Potter books in special editions. They're beautiful, and if you're in a bookshop sometime, you might want to have a look at them. The second thing I wanted to say is that not everybody thinks Joseph Campbell's work is correct. Many people think the patterns that he identified are not really as widespread as he claims. But for me, his work is an interesting way of helping us understand how stories work. And with stories as popular as Star Wars and Harry Potter continuing the tradition, it seems that the hero's journey is going to be with us for some time to come. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for staying to the end of what is, I think, literally the longest library video ever made. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next week. In the meantime, keep discovering, keep exploring.